talk hamburgers for starters here. Almost have to jump into a few problems just for fun, but. So last time we talked about appreciation, depreciation of exchange rates. And that can get a little confusing. Do you want your currency to be appreciating? You always want it to be real strong. Depends on who you are, right? So the exchange rates are kind of funny that they can be, for the United States and most developing or developed countries, rather, they are floating. So the government is not intervening like China does to keep it fixed at something better. So what's going to drive the exchange rate is just what's really going on in the economy. So that could be if we're generating a bunch of inflation. So if the prices of American stuff is going through the roof, is that going to cause our currency to be more valuable or less valuable? Less, right? So we'll get into kind of the things we'll get into. I brought the club today. I don't even know if we'll get there or not, but we're going to do some supply and demand to get the foreign exchange market. So that's where we'll be going. And so what we're going to start off with, though, is the old Big Mac index. And the reason we look at the Big Mac index is for purchasing power parity illustrations. Does anybody remember what PPP means?
Anywhere in the world, the price will still be the same or the same product.
Okay, good. So purchasing power parity, PPP. We cover this in principles of macro class, and I don't know if we covered it in something else or not, but you see it in intermediate. So basically the same. The price of one good. There's also, this is kind of related to the law of one price. So purchasing power parity says that identical goods in two countries should cost the same after adjusting for exchange rate. So whether you're talking about yen or you're talking about dollars, identical goods in each country, if one says it's 156 yen and the other good says that it's $1, and the two goods are a can of Coca-Cola, and that can of Coca-Cola is a 12-ounce can of Coca-Cola, blah, 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 then after we adjust for exchange rates, it should turn out that you can trade one can of cola for another can of cola without a profitable opportunity in there. So, so sometimes this is also referred to, at least the way I have it characterized here, is the law of one price. So also known as, AKA, the way I have this defined here, the law of one price. So we would have that assumption. What are some complicating issues that would cause it to not be that? What can you imagine about two goods, one in India or one in Japan, one in the United States, that after we do that math, they're not equal to each other? What would be some complicating things, which would actually be some of our assumptions to get to that answer? What would be an assumption, Brady? Okay, that's kind of two different things, but yes, I think you're onto a couple different things. So what do you mean by, let's start with if it was made there, or were you going into shipping costs?
Materials were there.
But the materials could be in both places, right? So what about on this materials? If it was made there, just kind of stick with that concept for now. And shipping is going to be one of them. If you want, I guess we can start our list here. Let's go ahead and just put shipping. So shipping cost. So obviously to send that Coca-Cola, the single can of Coca-Cola anyway, from one country to another is going to cost a lot of money. But if we have a whole shipping container full of cans of Coca-Cola, average cost could be very low if there's like 1 million cans of Coke. I don't know how many could fit in a shipping container, but you know, imagine packing that thing full of 12-ounce cans. We could bring that shipping cost down pretty low potentially. All right, so back to this, the mate thing. Luke,
What about like different tax rates for these two?
okay, good, yeah. So there could be different tax rates. On production or income or sales. I mean, that could vary across and give a difference in terms of the ultimate retail price. So some of the institutional structures within each country could vary. Okay, good. There's kind of one other biggie looming there on making our Coca-Cola in the United States versus making our Coca-Cola in, let's say, India or some other place. Labor. So labor cost is going to be different. So assumptions, you know, labor and other resource price differentials. Now, we kind of want to focus in on labor. Why? Why is that significant? Labor in India is cheaper per hour for equally skilled people, right? So we're not talking about them not having the same amount of education. Let's get right down to brass tacks. You've got an Indian who's got an X amount of education, and they've proven themselves to be X level of productivity, and we got an American that's had the same education, they've proven themselves to be at that same X level of productivity. So what's the deal with labor? Why don't those change? Yeah.
It's cheaper because of regulations comparison.
What kinds of regulations?
Just like minimum wages, working conditions, like hours, even for overtime pay.
That's not the main one. That's not the thing that's going to cause a longer term differential between American workers and Indian workers. Like those Dan. What's that?
They're willing to work for less.
Yeah, but wouldn't they like to make more? Why are they willing to, work for less? What's that? Living costs are different. All right, so living cost is less, but if they went there, if there was a bump up in living costs in the United States, what would cause the wages to converge? Let's think about that for a second. Indian, equally skilled people, American, equally skilled people, taking into account living costs, which is a good comment, what would cause their wages to equalize over time?
Competition.
Less opportunity? Yeah, I mean, you can build on the opportunities. JC, what did you say?
Competition.
Competition of what form?
Of the same industry, just more of that factory.
What would that Indian person, if they're making, again, adjusting for cost of living, if they're making 20,000 and the American's making 60,000, what might the Indian worker want to do? Luke?
Ask for more money.
Yeah, they'll do that, but they've got a better idea. There's lots of jobs over here in the United States. Caleb? Work more hours. I want to keep the hours commitment the same so that they would want to do it. Bryce? Go to the United States! Yes, are Indians free to come to the United States anytime they want and pick up an American job? No, it's called open immigration, open borders, right? That's can be a complex argument, but the point is that if resources can move from one place to the other, do they move to more profitable opportunities? Yes. So the machine that is used to package the Coca-Cola in the can, is that the same machine they're using in India that they are in the United States? Yes, because they can ship that machine over to India without any problem. But we can't ship other resources like labor. So we have this idea. How many of you are planning to take international economics or have taken it? I know a handful of you have taken it. So it's not required for the economics major, but it is required for the finance major. So those of you who are finance, you would have had it. And then a lot of the econ majors, it's a suggested course it's a good course. But we talked about factor mobility. So whether a factor of production, whether a resource can move from one spot to the other is going to impact the overall price. So the differences here are usually on the mobility. So factor mobility is an issue. So if we have a good that is 80% labor and 20% machine capital, then that one might be more impacted, would be further apart between the two countries than one that is 80% machine and 20% labor, right? So we're going to see differences depending on the nature of the good that we're looking at. Okay, and then, so any questions or comments so far? So that's kind of the reasons why we might see purchasing power parity fall apart.
So like, why don't, are there like unions in India as well to demand for a higher wage?
No, it's mostly government. I mean, I know India decently well, but I still wouldn't consider myself an expert, but I've spoke there on economic freedom. I've dug into their numbers and stuff. And so I think they score pretty good on the union area, good in terms of that it's pretty free, people are pretty free, but there's government restrictions that, like, you can't fire somebody, used to be on the books, it's a little different now. But imagine you hire somebody, you can't fire them, right? We're back to Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged type of stuff. That, oh, I've got an idea on how to lower unemployment, I don't know, our current regime, I hope they wouldn't get this crazy. They're already coming out with some other types of interventions, I guess, into the labor market, but to say you can't fire anybody. Oh, we can lower unemployment, you can't fire anybody, right? You can think of how destructive that would be for productivity when somebody knows they can't get fired. This is something we bump up into in the university system. Anybody know what that somewhat social, tenure, and sometimes in high schools too. So that tenure system technically isn't that you can't fire them, but there are a number of hoops that you have to jump at. It's very difficult for somebody to get fired. I think we saw that, I can't remember if it was this class or another on in the government that might not have been any class, I think it was something else I was watching, where it's very difficult in certain places in government to actually fire a person. You have to go through steps 1 through 25. And so a lot of government employees are kind of there that may not otherwise have been there in a private sector job. So anyway, those sorts of frictions reduce mobility and decision making. So India certainly suffers from a lot of those labor market restrictions, even though they have made moves here recently under the Modi regime to be more free with labor. Okay, any other questions or comments? So speaking of India, my first video we're going to do, it's a good one. It involves India. No matches. There it is. this kind of explains purchasing power parity pretty darn good. The memories of unity is insane on the road.
So today we're in India to explain and also to take advantage of the Molasses-Samuelson effect. We'll also be understanding a little bit more about the purchasing power parity corrections and why they're important. So let's take a look at this mobile phone store. Ask them about some prices. Come on. Namaste.
Namaste.
So can you show me one of your nice phones?
This is the next one, the Apple, the new one, the 7 Plus.
Great, great. Okay, that looks pretty good. So yeah, can you go ahead?
Yeah, 72,000. It's 72,000. Nice, that's right. It's cheap now.
70,000 rupees. That's about $1,000. At least as much, maybe a little bit more than you pay in the United States. And that makes sense because this good is easily tradable. Tradable goods sell for about the same price everywhere in the world. Because if it were a lot cheaper here, people would buy it here and sell it in the United States. Arbitrage means that goods which are easily tradable can sell for about the same price everywhere. Now the situation, however, is very different when it comes to services. Services are hard to trade. And that means that the price of services, the price of labor, it can differ a lot in different places in the world. In fact, I think I need a haircut. Let's go. Namaste.
Hello, how are you, sir?
Good. Haircut today.
Please come.
I have to say, I wanted to do this so bad. I just didn't get the opportunity to do it when I was there, but I'm getting a haircut at some point in one of these places that looks pretty good.
Great.
See this all over.
Well, on the job. Nice bye. Well, that was a good haircut and an excellent head massage. And it cost me just 50 rupees. That's less than $1 in the United States. Raju is just as good a barber as he in the United States, but he earns a lot less. Raju might like to come to the United States and sell his labor for $10 an hour instead of the $10 a day or less that he earns here in India. But labor is immobile. A host of laws prevent him from moving. As a result, the price of labor can be very different across the world. And that means the price of services that are immobile. Not just haircuts, but also house cleaning, taxi services, massage services. They're a lot cheaper in poorer countries. The fact that services are cheaper in poorer countries is often called the Molasses-Samuelson effect, after Bella Balassa and Paul Samuelson pointed out this fact and developed models to explain it at a deep level. The fact that services are cheaper in poorer countries also means that on average, prices are lower. The price level is lower. That means that each dollar has greater purchasing power in the poorer country. And so if we want to compare GDP, or if we want to compare living standards across countries, we've got to take into account the differences in purchasing power. And that leads us to our next video on purchasing power parity corrections. Johnny Bot.
Yeah.
All right, so that's our PPP. I don't know if, is that this one? 6 minutes.
Now let's consider the hypothesis of
Oh, yeah, okay, that's where it gets
you go to
boring.
Norway
This is
where
where you
the
guys get
parity
to
is
listen.
trade.
Okay, all right. All right, so that is a little dose of purchasing power parity. And so, let's see, should we do this on the big screen here? Let's go to the Big Mac. Okay, so let's see if we can fix that. So this is the Big Mac Index, which is in our textbook. They have a lot of textbooks have the Big Mac Index because it kind of is helpful in illustrating some of the purchasing power parity stuff. So what we have is the Big Mac. One of the things McDonald's prides itself on is being consistent, right? So certainly if you go get a Big Mac in Kansas City versus one in Oklahoma versus one in New Jersey versus one in California, you take a bite and you probably are tasting the same thing you would have at any place, right? So that's part of what's McDonald's has prided itself on since day one. And so they continue that as much as possible around the globe. In India, however, the Big Mac will not taste the same. Does anybody know why?
They don't eat cows.
They don't eat cows, yeah. So and by the way, they do have, the Muslim population is about 20%, Christian population is like 3% in India, but so there are some meat eaters. So depending on the area that you're in India, you can find meat. It's not like it's there, and the Hindus pretty much accept that there's that going on there. So it's kind of a cultural thing, certainly for practicing Hindus, although my foreign exchange student, Luigi, that stayed with us for about 6 months 5 years ago, they can stray, just like Christians might do some stuff that's not so Christian. Well, Hindus are no different. They're all human beings. So when Dweej, he was on the soccer team, my son was on the soccer team too, and you guys know how you have the team dinners. So Dweej comes back and he's all this, he had a great personality. I actually just did a communication with him here recently. I haven't spoken to him for a while. So he's really happy and he's like, Russ. And my wife was there too, Russ and England. Oh my gosh, the team dinner was excellent. We got it, and it was juicy, tender, and you cut into it. They called it steak.
Oh no.
And I'm like, wait, that steak comes from a cow. Did you know that? And he's like, yeah, he kind of knew that. He wasn't too far off. But, so he's kind of a jokester. But I love the way he said that, and they called it steak. And so he had partaken in a little bit of bacon and some other things too. And he grew up in a family where they were super vegetarian, basically vegan. So they did not do fish or anything. So anyway, he enjoyed his time here. I haven't asked him about his meat eating habits lately, but that was kind of fun. So the Big Mac is called the what is it, the Taj or something like that. Anyway, it's made out of chicken. So they do eat chicken, and so their patty is a chicken. So my point in bringing that up is that there are some even physical differences, but in many places around the world, the Big Mac is truly basically identical to what we have here. Okay, so if we look at Mexico right now, I want you guys to pull out a piece of paper and your calculator. And where is Mexico? There it is, Mexico, right above them. Okay, so let me blow this up a little bit. So what's cool about the index and what they do is they keep live data. They update this every month or something. So currently, right now in the United States, a Big Mac costs 54 pesos. So we got 54 pesos, and in the United States, it's running $5.66. So imagine we're down in the border town. Let's see, where we could do Texas, maybe. This is why Texas. What's the border? What? Brownsville. Brownsville, and what's the bordering town in Mexico? because that's not the one I was thinking of.
El Paso and Juarez.
Juarez, yeah, I was thinking Juarez. So El Paso and Juarez. So you are an entrepreneur, and you've got you go over to Juarez, and there's a Mexican McDonald's there, and right across the border we have a El Paso McDonald's as well. So that would allow you to kind of go back and forth. Let's say that it's easy for you to go back and forth, which it is if you're American, or if you're Mexican with certain credentials, you can pretty easily go back and forth over the border as well. All right, so the implied exchange rate, they say, is 9.54. The difference between this and the actual exchange rate is 20. So the current exchange rate is 20.11, and that's pesos per dollar, right? 20 pesos gets you $1. And so they say that the Mexican peso is 52.6% undervalued. So here's my exercise for you. On your paper, I want you to pretend you have $1,000. $1,000. So instead of putting it in GameStop, I want you to make some money off of this situation. How much money can you make? Pretend you're an American, which I think we got everybody in here is United States. Well, I know we have people. I just meant that we don't have any Mexicans. They don't. Well, that's not true. I guess you technically are. So let's see. We could play this game the other way around than with you. Yeah, that would be fun. All right. So we have one Mexican. Jonah's the only Mexican, right? All right. So now you're gonna make money the other way. All right. For everybody else, except well, maybe we should split up the class. That sounds kind of fun. Let's take this half of the room. All you guys are going to pretend you're Mexicans. I've never done this before because usually I just go the American way. So you guys are all Mexicans on this side, and you guys and Zoom. So Olivia and JC, you are Americans. Because there's money to be made, regardless of you're a Mexican or you're American, there's money to be made here. So you got $1,000. You got $1,000 to work with. So you Mexicans are going to have to figure out what your $1,000 is worth in terms of pesos if you want, and go to work. Tell me how much money you're going to make.
How much is a Big Mac in the US?
Arbitrage. What's that, JC?
How much is a Big Mac in the US?
$5.66. So if you guys want to pull this up, you can. If you can't read it, if you go to Google Big Mac Index, and I'm just on the front page of the Mexican peso. But otherwise, the American Big Mac is $5.66. The Mexican Big Mac is 54 pesos. The exchange rate is 20.11. That's really all the data that you need to figure out how much money you can make.
Can you make $2,107?
What'd you come up with?
2107.83.
I agree. Then I think said it aloud, I was like, I mean, I got 98, so the difference wasn't that far.
201. Say it again one more time, JC.
2107.83.
We got a little off there, but. JC, was that how much that you made, like $100 in dollars, or like?
Yeah, that's the profit.
Yeah, that's my profit from making 372 Big Macs in Mexico and bringing it to America, then selling them for $5.66. Gives you 2,107.83.
Okay, so hold on to that thought, JC. I want to bring in some other people. Anybody else? What did you get?
I got 1,005.52.
1,005.52. Aaron?
I got
2 what?
2403.
2403.
Yeah, 1,105.
Okay.
Sorry, 1,105.
All right, so I don't really know the right answer. So who wants to come to the board? I didn't calculate this out ahead of time. So who wants to come to the board? I saw Bryce first. Come to the board. Let me see it. And Luke, why don't you come to the board too? Let's have both of you show your work. I don't know. I didn't know what answer either one of you did, but we can do this one, Luke. Social distance over here, and there we go. Oh, and I need to have one of my Mexicans come over here.
Can you explain exactly
All
what?
right. I want to know how much you guys did. So I want to, whatever you did, we'll just kind of help us learn. So Isaac, why don't you go right there on the side? Well, I guess come over here, Isaac.
I think I did the same
We
thing.
can get rid of this.
I think I did mine wrong. I think I did what they did.
Just remember, you're a Mexican investor. That's the main thing.
So I'm going to the US.
I don't know what you're. That's what I wanted you guys to talk about. That's what kind of fun. Way to make money here, one way or the other. They both have $1,000 worth of value. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They have, well, that's what I'm going to see what they do. I'm curious myself. Thanks, sir.
What Luke did is what I got. The final answer.
Okay.
Yeah, but I did the same thing.
Price coming up, same thing. Let's see what the Mexican over here comes up with. Okay, so the Americans.
Go on, Isaac, bro.
All right, well, Isaac's finishing up his. Let's kind of, you guys got the same answer. So walk me through this price. You got $1,000, which is equivalent to that. We're just kind of showing. Or, so what are you doing here?
And that's 54 cases per Big Mac, which will get you 372 Big Mac.
Okay.
And you take that back into America and sell it for the 566, which will get you to 21.552, and then minus your initial investment of $1,000.
You back follow that? So you convert your dollars into pesos and then buy the Big Macs and then walk across the border. And let's see what
Do you think
our
that?
Mexican national.
Do you
can
think
there.
that the U.S. Coast Patrol they would stop you from having 372 Big Macs in your car?
Yeah, you might be running into some problems.
Because that might be a little better.
So once you start commercially bringing, so similar to if you guys, how many of you have traveled to Mexico? So just 10 of you, maybe not even 5 or so. Okay. So what do they ask you with your papers, the customs papers, when you come across? Liz? Yeah, no, I'm thinking about the questions like your suitcase and stuff. What types of stuff are they asking about? Sorry? If you're bringing food, so they don't want you bringing food products. Alcohol can be some limits. Okay, you got to declare. So if you have a bunch of Big Macs or diamonds or something else, does anybody remember from their customs forms, like what's the dollar value that you have to tell them? And how much cash you have? $10,000. So once you start bringing stuff over, you might be subject to tariffs, right? And stuff like that. So they let the small potatoes go and you bring home a couple bottles of booze or whatever. That's why you buy it in the duty free. And if the United States had a tariff on that, they're not going to tax the day you come across. Oh, Lawson.
I'm not even upset.
Hard times. So, then you might be subject to, if you're commercially doing it, then you might have tariffs or other things that you're doing. Okay, so let's see, what do we have here? So we've got 20,000. So you took it as if you're holding 20,000 pesos.
Yeah.
You're a Mexican, you have 20,000 pesos. Okay.
And then I bought as many Big Macs as I could in Mexico.
Okay, good.
372 Big Macs. And then I go to the border of the U.S. and sell for 566.
Okay.
And then that means I have $2,000, like $7.
Yep.
$107. go back to Mexico, convert that, I've got 42,000 some odd change pesos.
Yep, in pesos.
Subtract my initial 20,000 pesos, and I'm left with 22,000, or
Yeah.
278 profit pesos.
Good. Did anybody on the Mexican side do it differently, given my instructions? Did you start with 20,000 pesos? Do some people, especially people who live on the border, carry both American dollars and pesos out? So if you had 1,000 actual American dollars, how would that change this equation? It doesn't change it by much, but what would that change if you were actually wearing dollars? Yeah, you just convert in Mexico now. You're a Mexican and you happen to have $1,000 for whatever reason, and then you just exchange it, and then you start off with where Isaac left off and do the same process, right? So I'm kind of glad we did that because it hopefully illustrates that whether you are a Mexican or whether you are an American, both of you, given open borders, which isn't true, both of you would be helping the prices change, right? So what direction is it going to head if we start having this activity go on? So let's pretend that it's more like iPhones or something that's tradable. What's going to be the direction of things?
I also have a question. How do you get to 2.68? Where did that come from?
2.68.
That's how much a Big Mac is. Oh, wow, I think I
It's
know.
54 divided.
Yeah, that's supposed to be 54. That's supposed to be.
Yeah, you just had it. I didn't catch that either. Yeah, so 54.
That's how much it is American dollars.
You flipped it back, but yeah, this is the right way to do it. 20,000 divided by this equals
The answer's still the same.
Yeah. Which is right in line with what these guys, what the Americans were doing too, right? So now my bigger question though is if we've got Mexicans doing this activity and we've got Americans doing this activity, what's going to be the changes over time? Like how does the market change? What's going to be happening?
The cost of a Big Mac in Mexico is going to go up while the cost of a Big Mac in the U.S.
Okay, so we're going to have a little difference of convergence. Now, that's one thing that could happen. But what's another thing that could happen? Instead of the price, what about the effective price? What's going to happen with exchange rates? They're going to change. Like what would need to, if we were correcting for this in the exchange market, because remember now we have Americans coming and changing into pesos, increase or decrease in the demand for pesos? Huh? Increase, right? And then same thing here. He had pesos already, then that would be fine. You'd just be doing the pesos. And then otherwise you'd convert, if you actually had dollars, you'd be doing the same movement that's going on here if you were holding dollars. And so when we have the demand changing, what's going to happen to the exchange rate? Which direction would it head? Would it get higher or lower?
It goes lower, you get less pesos per dollar.
Less pesos per dollar. So they're saying here, the reason that it's 52% undervalued, because our prediction using purchasing power parity and some economics would be that this would go on and cause the exchange rate to change. And there might be some underlying movements depending on how big they were with the dollars, but it's really the exchange rate market that's going to change. The supply and demand for peso dollars is going to be impacted by these things. Okay, so that is the peso. Yeah.
So I've got a buddy in the Netherlands, and he said, like, we were talking about the import tax and export tax and stuff. He said it's crazy how much it costs. Like, because he lives in the Netherlands, that part that's right by Belgium.
Yeah.
He said just trying to get even a couple of things from Belgium, how much tax you have to pay to bring it back to the Netherlands.
Yeah, there's a lot of different stuff there, and the Netherlands are notoriously expensive because their tax rates are very high too. So the index also does this gross domestic product adjustment. So they realize that, hey, Mexican labor is different than American labor, and maybe there's some other nuances or differences. Here is the exchange rate over time. So we'd kind of be saying PPP doesn't make sense or it's wrong if they were identical. Of course, we know they're not. And then that leads us to the things we've already talked about of why is it different. And so that's what it's looked like over time. And then they got all these interactive things. Australia, Canada, New Zealand, all the countries are in here. And then you can go through and change this. So 1986 is when they first did it. Again, it's more of a learning tool than anything, but it's kind of fun to look at. And so purchasing power parity then gets addressed not just with a single product, but using gross domestic product. So using a basket of goods is ultimately where we can attempt to test purchasing power parity and see if it holds up over time. The burger thing, though, before we leave the burgers, I just wanted to bring up this GDP Adjusted Index. So the GDP Adjusted Index addresses the criticism that you would expect the average burger prices to be cheaper in poor countries than the rich ones because the labor costs are lower. PPP signals where exchange rates should be heading in the long run as a country like China gets richer, but it says little about today's equilibrium rate. The relationship between prices and GDP per person might be a better guide to the fair value of the currency. So up here, they created a little button. So this one is going to look at GDP adjustment. And so when we click that button, we see a little bit bigger difference here where they're using the American Big Mac as a baseline and doing the math a little bit differently, which effectively takes income for each country into account. So a Big Mac is 53% less in Mexico, $2.68, which is what Isaac you had done, right? So we take the 54 peso Big Mac, convert it to 268, and when we turn it back to the United States and then use that as a baseline, then the GDP per person, it should be 41% less, which means the peso is 20% undervalued. So it does a little bit of an adjustment to it. I don't even go over this usually with the undergraduate class, but in this chapter, we're going to be doing more with GDP and the basket of goods and the price level. And this is one stab at that. And then you see that we've got these currencies being overed and the under changes a little bit. So again, it's just using Big Mac, so it's not hardcore thing. It's just kind of an interesting adjustment that gets you thinking about the basket of goods rather than a Big Mac, all that stuff.
So without just like let's say I take like my same $1,000, then US dollars, and I put it in pesos, and then I wait and I watch like the rate, the exchange rate, then how would I figure out what my money would be worth in American dollars whenever I go to translate it back? Would you just multiply it by the exchange rate?
So you're holding the other currency?
Yeah. So let's say I take $1,000 and I change the pesos right now. So I do it times the exchange rate today.
Yeah. So you can go backward, if I'm understanding you right, you're just going backwards and forwards. So
Yeah.
the exchange rate here as it's 20, and this is where you're going to see me be a little more using specific notation that I did with those of you, most of you had me for macro class, but it's 20 pesos per dollar. And so if we want to, I think what you're asking is just the inverse of the exchange rate. So this would be the exchange rate in terms of how we're expressing it with in terms of per dollar. But then we just invert that, so it's 1/20th of dollars per peso. So a 20th of a dollar is what it takes to buy a single peso. And so then you're just going to be multiplying that times the number of dollars that you have to get that.
So then, like, if I wanted to change it back to dollars, then I would take the future exchange rate and just multiply it by the amount of pesos that I have.
Yeah, you're just going to either use the inverse, and I have some exercises that we'll do. I don't know if we'll get to them today. That we'll kind of go back and forth because it can get confusing. In fact, I guess that's part of what I wanted to do here. So let me get rid of this for a second, because I think as you guys work through problems, I advise you to use my notation. So we're going to just follow what these guys did here. So you've got $1,000 times 20.11 pesos per dollar. So we're doing multiplication, right? So we get the 20,110. What? Well, the dollars cancel. This is where this notation kind of comes in handy. So this is always anything over 1, right? So two fractions multiplied times each other. The dollars cancel, and it turns into pesos. So now our next step is to take our 20,110 pesos and buy some Big Macs, which are 54 pesos for every Big Mac. Now you've got a fraction in the denominator. What do you do to solve for this? Cancel. Well, I got one more step first. When you have a fraction in the denominator, how do you solve it out? 20,000 divided by 54. We already know that answer. That's 372. 372 what? Big Mac. So invert and multiply times the numerator, right? Fraction in the denominator. Then we're going to do pesos over 1 times the inverse, which is Big Macs over pesos. The pesos cancel out, and what you're left with is 372 Big Macs. Now I'm going to take my 372 Big Macs, and I'm going to run over to the United States where I can sell them at $5.66 of dollars for every Big Mac I bring over, which means I'm going to end up with $2,105.52 what? The Big Macs cancel with each other, and I'm left with dollars. So the only weird thing I'm doing here is I'm putting the dollar sign at the end of the number rather than at the beginning, which a lot of countries do too, by the way. So that's the one thing you Americans anyway have to train yourself. Whereas the South Africans and I think peso, do you put it at the end in Mexico too or not? Yeah. Sometimes, yeah, put it at the end. A lot of other countries do it. Kind of similar to drive on the left side of the road or the right side of the road is just kind of a cultural convention that we did over time. Yeah, that's another confusing thing. Yes, we get the periods and being commas and stuff. Okay, so then we've got the $2,000, and then we just do the subtraction from there. But everybody see what I'm doing there with the fractions? Because once you start getting euros and yen and it'll get kind of ugly, you just put that exchange rate in terms of one or the other, and then you can invert it as well, flipping them around. Okay, good on that. All right, so let's see here. I did want to look at the implied exchange rate, maybe to not even put this one quite to bed yet here. So what we did with the Big Mac, let's see, I'm trying to decide. Yeah, I'm going to erase. I'm going to keep that. Erase this one. Okay, so back to the law of one price. Law of one price that I already defined earlier. Identical goods should sell for the same price. So the exchange rate, if we look at the real price and we put the price of the Big Mac, price of the Big Mac in Mexico versus the price of the Big Mac in the United States. So check out my notation. I'm using now the real price in each country of the same good. So this is our real price, back to principles of microclass. It's the relative price of what am I trading one good for the other. Well, if we do it this way, we can do, okay, the Mexican price is 54 pesos per Big Mac, divided by, what was it, $5.66? $5.66 per Big Mac. And if somebody has their calculator out, 54 divided by 5.66, 9.54. And now it's 9.54 what? Well, this is really, remember the US Big Mac down here and the Mexican Big Mac down here. And so flip over the, I'll do it in slow motion here. Big Mac in Mexico times the Big Mac in the US over the price, or I'm sorry, the dollars. Yeah, that's right, okay. Dollars. Okay, what am I screwing up? This is not. Oh, I needed to apply the exchange rate. Yeah, no, that's right. This is the implied exchange rate. Okay. So the Big Macs are Big Macs, right? The law of one price. So now what we have is the pesos to dollar exchange rate. So it says the implied exchange rate is 9.54 pesos per dollar.
Just based off the Big Macs.
That based off the Big Macs. Like if the law of one, so what we're kind of saying here is if a Big Mac's a Big Mac and they should be priced the same in each country, then the exchange rate should actually be 9.54. So this is the implied exchange rate. This is the implied exchange rate. Assuming the law of one price, which I'll just put PPP for short, which is basically the same. So it's like, if a Big Mac's a Big Mac and resources are mobile and all of that stuff, then this is effectively the peso to dollar exchange rate. So maybe some of you remember that number. If I go back, I got to go back to the raw index. 9.54. So a Big Mac costs 54,566. The implied exchange rate is 9.54. So that's what the implied exchange rate, assuming purchasing power parity holds. And so the actual exchange rate is 20, which means it's 52% undervalued at 20 versus, it's comparing these two numbers, 20 versus 9.54. All right, questions on that? That's probably the hardest part, that's where these differentials come from. So now if the implied exchange rate is different than the actual exchange rate, there's a profitable opportunity. Whether you're a Mexican or whether you're an American, then there's going to be pressure for the exchange rate to move. Okay, last call for questions there. Well, I got the screen down. Grab the book. Chapter 20. How many weeks of class we got left? Like 4 or 5? Two. Including this one?
Yeah.
So that means we're almost done. Wow. Okay, so here is a picture from your book. And what they've done, oh, sorry, let me put the screen down. So they did what I just did, except using the price level. So now we're back to looking at GDP, right? If the price level is generated, remember, from GDP estimates, although it could be from a basket of goods like the consumer price index. And so here's the actual pound to dollar exchange rate over time. Here's the implied pound to dollar exchange rate doing what we just did, right? So basically it's kind of saying, if PPP is true, then the exchange rates should be following this path. If it's not true, then it would be off. And so you can see that, what do you think? Is that a decent fit or not?
No.
Not perfectly, right? So again, it kind of shows some of the shortcomings of PPP as a predictive tool, but it does a pretty good job of like, see it's kind of heading down, and then this is heading down, and so longer term, it's not terrible, and it helps us kind of better understand what exchange rates are looking like. If you see exchange rates do this, and this is what the previous data looked like, could that be a profitable opportunity for a currency trader? Yeah, right. Then it's like, oh, well, that's weird. We've got all this data, or better yet, let's take this data, and then this happens, or this happens in 2014. You're kind of saying, huh, maybe this is the time to take a position in that currency, if you're in the game, which is my other caveat. But that's what currency traders could do. They're going to be looking at that type of analysis, and one of the things you could use is purchasing power parity to try to compare. Okay, questions or comments there? All right, let's see. I think it's good. Here's the burger. Yeah, I'm gonna put that away. All right, so now you guys know how to make arbitrage opportunities. We're going to talk about. Oh, I took it out already. All right, so the related concept to this is the real exchange rate. So the real exchange rate, the real exchange rate RER is the exchange rate expressed in terms of purchasing power for goods and services.
This is a haircut.
Yeah. Yes. So it's a way to think about it. So with the law of one price, if we take the real exchange rate, let's see if I cannot butcher this. I'm going to maybe try to use some of our other numbers here. Yeah, let's try this. Okay, so let's take the real exchange rate. First of all, let me give you the formula here. Is, well, it depends on which direction we're heading. Let's just head this way. So the real exchange rate, take the price of the Big Mac in Mexico divided by the exchange rate times, your textbook uses big E for exchange rate, times the price of the Big Mac in the United States. All right, so in Mexico, we had the 54 pesos per Big Mac, the Mexican Big Mac, to be specific, divided by the exchange rate times the price of the US. So we had $5.66 per American Big Mac, and then the exchange rate. So what was the exchange rate again? 20.11. So now we got 20.11 pesos per dollar. So now do this math.
0.47.
0.47. So we got 54 divided by the 20 times this, and you get 0.47. 0.47. And now it's a matter of 0.47 what? And this is where you struggle on the homework and the test if you don't do this notation. Is it $0.47? Is it 0.47 pesos? Is it 47%? Is it 0.47 Big Macs? Is it 0.47 Mexican Big Macs? Is it 0.47 US Big Macs? What is it?
Would it be pesos over Big Macs because wouldn't the dollars in the denominator cancel out, so you'd end up with pesos over Big Mac? It would be the Big Mac from the US. So then you flip that, and Big Macs would cancel, so you'd have pesos over pesos, so it'd be 0.47 pesos.
No.
Damn it.
I'm gonna. You were kind of on a roll there for a little bit. Well, you're gonna say that's something to rather.
Don't the pesos cancel out?
So you were kind of getting close here. So just follow the math. Fraction times a fraction. Fraction times a fraction. The dollars cancel.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think you were saying that one may be right.
Yeah, I got that.
So now let's go pesos over Big Mac US. And then upstairs we still have 54 pesos per Big Mac Mexican, which now is equal to 0.47. Fraction in the denominator, flip it over, multiply it times the numerator. And now what are we talking? These cancel.
Oh, that's the way around. Other way around.
0.47 what? For a Mexican Big Mac. So that's showing your real rate of return under this current exchange rate. Half a Big Mac in the US. So cut that sucker in half. Take the American Big Mac, get out your knife, cut it in half. 0.47 of an American Big Mac can be traded for a full Big Mac in Mexico. So, again, this is just illustrating that the law of one price isn't holding. Okay, now, half a Big Mac. Yep, so the trade is a half of an American Big Mac for a full Big Mac in Mexico, is what's really going on under the current exchange rates. Now, insert the implied exchange rate that would have been predicted using purchasing power parity. So now, let me use a different color so we don't get confused on what we're doing. So that's the real exchange rate, but what should it be? So if we take the real exchange rate, and now we multiply it by the implied exchange rate, all I want you to do is shove 9.54 in for that sucker. The rest of it's all the same. 54 times 9.54 times 5.66. The rest of the math is all going to flow. What does this equal? 54 divided by 9.54 times 5.66.
1.
1! What the heck? Isn't that fun? I love doing this. Is borderline mental masturbation going on now, so I have to pull back, but it equals 1.
I'm done. That's great. That's gross thing I've ever heard. It's classic.
1. 1 what? One what? 1
US Big Mac.
US Big Mac can be traded for 1 Mexican Big Mac, right? That's what we predict using purchasing power parity, law of one price. So this is what we're saying if purchasing power parity holds. If purchasing power parity holds, it's simply 1 for 1. So PPP predicts 1-for-1 trade of identical goods. Identical goods should cost the same. Well, if that was the case, what should the exchange rate be? 9.54. That's what we did over here. We said that it should be 9.54, and so that's why when we plugged it back into the real exchange rate formula, we get the 1-for-1. All right. So, questions on that? I know you guys want it to be a drop the mic moment, but we still got 5 minutes. So I'm gonna. I'm adding on to this. It's just we have to extrapolate this to the price level, and then we'll be done.
Yeah, I never thought in a class period I did that answer for this.
All right, so in general, using price levels of each country which reflect GDP of each country. Each has a different basket of goods. You can imagine we can throw a car in the mix, and we can throw some rice into the mix, and we can throw some tacos into the mix, and we can throw some, right? So we think about GDP, it's everything. Well, we have a lot of the same things, but they're never really identical, like we're illustrating here with the Big Mac or anything, right? So we got all those different factors. So the general formula here for the real exchange rate is that and I should have prefaced this, well, let me just do this opposite. Let me put the real exchange rate first. The real exchange rate is equal to the exchange rate times the ratio of the prices. And so now that we're getting into foreign trade and foreign exchange, the asterisk denotes the foreign country. So we got the price level in the United States, the price level in Mexico, or this is the price level in Japan, or this is the price level in India. And then the formula for it, so how we kind of flip back then is we look at the nominal exchange rate, E, which by the way, this is peso per dollar or yen per dollar or whatever. Right? So this is the one we've been talking about, is equal to the real exchange rate times, this is just, all I'm doing is flipping this over to the other side. So the PL, the foreigner's price level is now on top, and the American price level is on the bottom. So
we just look at this country like that.
no, because it'll get confused. I mean, you could if country one was always going to be the domestic country, but this is the,
just in a specific problem.
we will. We'll do some problems tomorrow. So this is the foreign country here. Now, the one thing to take away, this is the exchange rate movements. If there's inflation in the United States, holding other things constant, like foreigners inflation. So just the U.S., because of COVID, $1.9 trillion worth of spending deficits, we start to have inflation in the United States. Look at this formula. What's going to happen to the exchange rate? Is it going to appreciate or depreciate? Okay. American inflation. So the bottom's going up, causing this expression to go down, which is this. So as Americans have inflation, the exchange rate, the Americans anyway, will find depreciating their currency. So this is kind of handy for that reason, and that's what we'll pick up tomorrow.